November 14, 1863. The day broke with lowering clouds, and all the indications of a cold, disagreeable storm. Directly after a scanty breakfast, all were surprised to hear the general call sound. Simultaneously came an order to issue rations. A cup of raw flour and a small piece of raw beef was hastily dumped into the haversack of each man, and out from their comfortable quarters the men went, into the rain, which had begun to fall. Turning to the west, the deep mud in the road drove us to the railroad track. Stumbling along as best we could, we breasted the sheets of cold rain that were dashed in our faces by fierce gusts of wind. Perseverance and time brought us to the river opposite London. Instead of crossing the river, the road leading down the right or north bank was taken. By this time, the clay hills had become water soaked a foot deep by the incessant rain, and the tired artillery horses could do little more than work themselves through the heavy clay mortar without the extra exertion of dragging the heavy guns after them. As usual, recourse was had to the soldiers to haul them. Men were stationed along the tugs, and traces as close as they could walk, to pull while the drivers plied spur and quirt and cass to the poor horses as they floundered through the slippery, sticky, treacherous mud. 3 miles below London, night overtook us beside some heavy timber. Drenched, chilled, and tired, we moved into the timber under the most stringent orders to build no fires, make no noise, and to remove none of our trappings. All day in the rain and mud, toiling without food, with raw flour and beef at night in the pitchy darkness of the woods, without fire, encumbered with wet garments and heavy trappings, the rain roaring down through the leafy trees, our hardy boys wore out the almost endless night. November 15. With the first faint light of day, a retreat was begun, which was continued slowly to Lenoir Station, the enemy following without pressing us. At Lenoir Station, our brigade was relieved from the front to get breakfast. Fires were quickly blazing, and the prospect of a cup of coffee brightened every countenance, and the sun shone out to cheer us. But alas for human hopes, before the water boiled, the enemy's bullets came pattering among us from across the river, and the picket line at our front came rushing in, broken and in confusion. Immediately came the order, 2nd Michigan, fall in, and we went to the front unified to restore the broken line. The line was reestablished without our firing a gun. November 16. Before daylight, we were called in, and at the Lenoir Station, our brigade had been detailed as rear guard. With the first light of day, the enemy began to push the rear guard of our army. It had been decided to move the army to Knoxville, and it was designed that the rear guard should delay the enemy's advance while the artillery and baggage trains were got as far on the way to Knoxville as the conditions of the roads would permit. This difficult task had been assigned to our brigade, 3rd Brigade, 1st Division, 9th Corps, whose decimated ranks would hardly equal a full regiment, under command of Colonel William Humphrey. The enemy was bringing up an army of 30,000 men on 2 roads that formed a junction about 2 miles from Campbell's Station. We were on one of the roads. The other was unguarded. The problem was this: to keep the enemy from advancing fast enough to capture any of our baggage or artillery, and at the same time reach Kingston Junction before the enemy's other column arrived there and cut us off from our army. With this object in view, our tactics were to fight and fall back. With a simple piece of artillery to annoy the enemy at long range, and our line deployed on either side of the road, We made a stand upon the first high ground and watched the enemy advance with wide extended lines to overlap ours, his flank thrown well forward as if intent upon closing in upon us, if opportunity afforded. Waiting for him until he was within range, we opened a deadly fire that checked his advance, and then we retreated, to repeat the same move on the next rise of ground. At last, we reached the junction. Out upon the open plain along the Kingston Road was the other rebel column in dense masses pressing on almost within rifle shot. The road makes a sharp turn here and there, and our line must swing round to cover this road. Something must be done quickly, or we will be overwhelmed in flank and rear. 2 men from each company were detailed to make a dash into the woods, while the whole rear guard set up such a hurrah as never came from so few throats. As they dashed forward, the rebels recoiled, and our line swung round just in time to present a square front to the united foe. The detailed men were abandoned to their own chances. Of the 2 detailed from my company, 1 returned, the other did not. November 18. Work continued on the defenses. Colonel Sanders still held the enemy at bay. He kept up the fight until 2:30 when he was killed. He had accomplished what he was set to do, make time for us to build defenses, but it cost his life. The fort near us was named in honor of his heroic sacrifice. November 19. Heavy skirmishing at various points about the city indicated that Longstreet was rapidly closing in to invest the town. The inhabitants left their homes in the outskirts of the city, abandoning everything and sought shelter elsewhere. The soldiers appropriated whatever of eatables or bedding they left. Stray rifle balls were frequently dropping inside our works. Sergeant Bell of Company C, while receiving directions from his captain, was struck on his upper lip, the ball penetrating his head opposite his ear. He was taken away to the hospital to suffer for a time. November 20. Light infantry firing, but little artillery firing, indicated that the enemy was perfecting preparations for some kind of action. When not on other duty, the men kept on improving the defenses. The enemy's pickets had occupied James Armstrong's house just under the hill to the west of Fort Sanders. In the evening, the 17th Michigan was ordered to dislodge the enemy from the house and burn it. They successfully accomplished the task in a gallant manner without the loss of a man. But when returning, the light from the burning building revealed them to the enemy, who opened upon them with grape shot and killed 1 lieutenant and wounded 3 men. An incident showing the ability of our soldiers to keep their wits about them in the most trying moments comes out of this sortie. The enemy in the Armstrong house was just preparing for supper when our men surprised them. A batch of biscuits hot from the fire was upon the table. When the 17th were safe inside the works, the pockets of a captain were observed to bulge out enormously. Being questioned about them, he drew forth the biscuits, still warm, with the remark, "It made me feel so bad to see those biscuits in danger of being burned." November 23rd. The enemy was suspiciously quiet all day. In the evening, the outposts were alarmed by signs of a night attack. Instantly, without confusion, our troops were in readiness and 50 houses leaped into flame along the front. This included the railroad depot. The light revealed the enemy drawn upon ready for attack. The wall of fire and the great light rendered their intended move impracticable, and they retired into the shadow.